Welcome to ChurchMediaDesign.tv. I'm your host, Brad Zimmerman, and today we're talking about drum enclosures, specifically how we save thousands by building our own custom curved drum enclosure. Now, before we dig in, I want to tell you what this is not. This is not going to be a straightforward A plus B equals super awesome drum enclosure. There is no parts list that you can go to your local Home Depot and just buy all of these things and make super awesome drum enclosure. What you will find out is you'll see the process that we went through to build our drum enclosure, and you're going to learn from my mistakes and the things that I learned along the way. That way you can decide whether or not you want to build your own drum enclosure, or if you decide this isn't for me, I'll have suggestions for you and price points of other drum enclosures you can consider. Now, if you're watching this video, most likely you're wanting to build a custom drum enclosure. Now, there's a lot of debates online of drum enclosure or not drum enclosure. I'm not going to get into that. At the end of the day, we had a small room and we had already gotten rid of all of our stage monitors and moved to in-ears, and really the drums were the last thing that were causing us sound issues and the last thing that we could change to try get more control. So we said we really need a drum enclosure. So the first thing we did is look at what options were out there. And the first option that most likely you'll find is from ClearSonic. ClearSonic has been making drum enclosures for ages, and you see these in churches around the country and around the world, and these are these folding plexiglass panels that you put around your drum enclosure. Now, you can get these in all sorts of different models, and you can actually get them with roofs on them, the whole 9 yards, and these range from anywhere from $500 to $2,000. So we looked at that, and then we said, well, what else is out there? And we came across the Phoenix enclosure from Whiteley Solutions. Now, the Phoenix enclosure is my favorite drum enclosure. This thing looks amazing. It's a curved piece of glass or Lexan or plexiglass, whatever it's made out of, and it looks super slick. You don't see any folding seams on it. You just see a drummer playing drums. You don't notice the drum enclosure itself. So we looked at that, but we looked at the price point. The price point's anywhere from $2,000 to $7,000. And so we said, well, wait a second. We can't afford the drum enclosure that we really want. But there's a problem. We really care what it looks like. So we don't want to go with a ClearSonic drum enclosure because our stage is small, and so the drums are kind of a focal point of our stage and our setup. So we really need something that looks nice, but we can afford. So this is where the do-it-yourself came into play. We decided to do it ourselves and try build our own drum enclosure that not only looked nice, but we could afford. So how did we do it? How did we build ours? Well, we had to start with a plan, and we wanted to base our plan off the best drum enclosure out there, which is the Phoenix enclosure from Whiteley Solutions. So since I didn't have a drum enclosure and I wasn't about to call up the company and say, hey, I really like your drum enclosure, but we can't afford it. Can you give me your plan so I can try and make my own? I'm not going to do that. So I had to try figure it out for myself. So we had to start doing some different calculations. We had to figure out the minimum space that our drum set needed, that we could still move around the outsides and it wasn't crowded and left room for extra gear to be added in the future. So we measured out space that our drum set currently used, and we figured out that we need about 7.5 feet wide and 6 to 7 feet deep. And then height-wise, we needed a minimum of 6 feet, but we would take more if we could get it. So now that we had those minimums, we needed to start shopping for the glass because that was the hardest part of it. I had a bunch of different ideas of how we could build a frame, but the glass is kind of a crucial part. So the type of material we used is called Lexan or poly-carbonate. And this is different than plexiglass. Lexan has a lot stronger breaking point on it. You could bend plexiglass or Lexan, but if you hit plexiglass, it will shatter, where Lexan actually in certain grades is bulletproof. And so this is very strong stuff and the right material for the job. So next I started to shop around locally to find some Lexan. I had already looked online and figured out that even though the prices might be good, the shipping costs were so high because of the weight that Lexan is that I wasn't going to buy online. So I started calling around to people that sell windows and glass and mirrors to see who could sell me Lexan. And the first quote that I got was well over $1,000, and it wasn't the right size and measurements. So I started to get a little discouraged, but I kept calling around, and eventually I found someone who would sell me a 6-foot tall by 10-foot long piece of Lexan plus 2 side pieces that were 4 by 6 for under $500. So now that we had our Lexan, it was time to build the frame. And my original idea was to just kind of go with the flow and get some some sort of U-shaped holder that the Lexan could slip into. We could bolt it to that and then screw that to the floor. But as I started looking for those parts, they were a lot more expensive than I thought. And the look of it to get everything lined up perfectly was going to be a lot more difficult. And so I ended up thinking, maybe this isn't the right way. Maybe we need to get somebody to fabricate a metal frame for it. So again, I started looking at companies locally that could do this sort of metal fabrication. And, it's a little crazy for me to show up at a shop and say, hey, I know you normally build like car parts or you normally do whatever you guys normally do. Would you build a drum cage for me that I could attach and make myself? And so I actually did this. I showed up at a business and found them. They were highly recommended, that they did a great job. Showed up there and kind of talked through what I was looking for. And it took a lot to make sure they would actually do the project, but they were willing to do it and they quoted it to me. And so I ended up hiring somebody locally to do the metal fabrication for this project. Now, the thing that I learned about working with somebody to do the manufacturing for you is that they actually want a plan to work from. They actually want some sort of diagram or plan to build from. They're not just going to build it along the way and hope that it turns out right. And so I needed to come up with what that plan was. And through one of my sit-down meetings with them, I learned that you can't take a 10-foot long piece of Lexan and bend it into a perfect half circle and have it be 7.5 feet wide. It would actually be less than 7.5 feet wide. And so I had to figure out, what does that bend look like? How do I bend and get part of a circle that it can be 7.5 feet wide, even though it's not a full half circle? What's that part look like so that they could actually manufacture it right? And so since I'm not great at math, I enlisted some help from a teacher that's part of our church, and he helped me figure out this next part of the process, and we came across this website that made it really simple. So we found this website called handymath.com that has a ton of different calculators on it, and the one that we used was the Complete Circle Arc Calculator. So on this calculator, you can put in any of these different values and it will give you the rest of it. And so we knew that we had a length of 10 feet and a width of 7.5. So we're going to say our length of our arc is 10 feet and our width of our arc is 7.5. So that's what we wanted, and we can hit calculate. So now this is going to calculate, and it's actually going to give us the thing that we want to know the most, our radius. So we can actually figure out how big is this circle to begin with. So now we know that the radius of this circle is 3.1942 feet, which would make the diameter of this circle 7.838 feet. So here you can see the final document that we sent them for the drum enclosure. And you'll notice the dotted line there shows what a full circle would look like versus the segment of that circle that we wanted to use for the front of our drum enclosure. So now that we had the final design in hand, I passed that on to the fabricators and they went ahead and built that. Now they ended up using aluminum because that was what was best for the job and for their fabrication, but that increased the project cost a little bit more than I was expecting. So our final frame cost was just under $700. Plus all the lumber and the miscellaneous nuts and bolts we bought, the whole project for our drum enclosure ended up costing us right around $1,500, which I don't think is bad for how marvelous this looks and how well it works. Now you'll notice that the back wall is not solid. We decided against doing a solid wall with a door or anything like that, and we just went with a bed sheet. And we backlight that with an LED, and it looks really nice. It provides an easy way for our drummer to get in and out, and it also cuts down on any extra reflections we would have from bouncing sound. Now it doesn't cut down on the sound quite as much, but we don't notice it, and it still cuts down on enough sound to make a difference for us. Well, you might be wondering, well, Brad, would you do it again? Are you happy with how it turned out? And the answer is absolutely. This has made such a big impact in how we sound and has been a great decision for us. We now have total control of how things sound, and we don't have to set our sound levels based on how loud a drummer's playing. And we have all of our sound coming through our PA instead of a weird mix of stage and PA volume together. Now in the future, if I had more money, I would definitely just buy a drum enclosure from Whiteley Solutions. But if the money's not there, we'll build another one in the future. And if you don't have the money, you can look into building your own. But if you do have the money, I would just highly recommend calling up Whiteley Solutions and buying one of their Phoenix enclosures because they are great. Well, if you have any questions about this project or anything that you want to know more about, make sure just to leave a comment wherever you're watching this video. And if you want to find the PDF of the plan that we used and the link to the online calculator and to the other drum enclosures, make sure to check those out in the show notes at ChurchMediaDesign.tv. Thanks for watching.